Have you ever looked at your cat or dog and thought about how they've been our companions for thousands of years? It's easy to picture ancient Egyptians with cats curled at their feet. After all, cats were practically royalty back then. But what if I told you that the ancient Egyptians also kept baboons on leashes, had pet lions lounging in their courtyards, and even tamed hyenas? Imagine stepping out for a morning stroll along the Nile only to find your neighbor walking a fully grown baboon instead of a poodle. Or picture a child playing not with a puppy, but with a young lion cub. This wasn't some exotic fantasy or a scene from a myth. This was daily life for some people in one of history's most fascinating civilizations. The ancient Egyptians didn't just share their homes with animals we'd consider ordinary pets. They formed bonds with creatures that we would today find strange, dangerous, or downright unbelievable. And the reasons behind these relationships reveal so much more than just eccentric taste. They open a hidden door into how the Egyptians saw the world, the gods, and their own place in the universe. In this video, we're going to explore the bizarre, the extraordinary, and the utterly unexpected pets of ancient Egypt. We'll meet sacred ibises that were treated like feathered royalty, gazelles that roamed palace gardens, and even crocodiles that were adorned with jewelry and worshipped like living deities. What drove people to invite such wild and unpredictable animals into their homes? Was it religion, status, affection, or something else entirely? The answers are as complex and captivating as Egyptian culture itself, blending spiritual beliefs with everyday life in ways that still astonish us today. So join me on this journey back in time, where we'll uncover not just the animals themselves, but the stories of the people who loved them, feared them, and sometimes even worshipped them. This is more than a list of unusual pets, it's a glimpse into the hearts and minds of a civilization that saw the divine in the creatures around them, no matter how fierce or strange. By the end of this video, you might never look at your own pet the same way again. Of course, they did keep cats, and these weren't just simple pets prowling the granaries for mice. In ancient Egypt, the common house cat was elevated to a position we can scarcely imagine today. They were known as mil, a name that echoes the very sound a cat makes, and they were seen as living manifestations of divine protection. This deep reverence stemmed from their association with Bastet, one of the most beloved and powerful goddesses in the entire Egyptian pantheon. Originally depicted as a fierce lioness, her image softened over time into a graceful domestic cat, embodying the dual nature of these animals. They could be gentle, nurturing companions, yet remained fierce and deadly hunters. Bastet was the goddess of the home, of fertility, of childbirth, and of protection against evil spirits and diseases. By keeping a cat in your home, you weren't just getting a pet, you were inviting a little piece of a goddess to take up residence. It was believed these feline guardians did far more than just chase away snakes or kill rats that threatened food supplies. They were thought to actively ward off malicious supernatural forces. The Egyptians saw the way cats would stare intently at empty corners or suddenly pounce on nothing visible to the human eye. They interpreted this not as quirky behavior, but as proof that their cat was battling an invisible evil, protecting the entire household from spiritual harm. This made them indispensable members of the family, their presence a vital spiritual safeguard. The value placed on cats was so immense that the law protected them with brutal severity. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus recorded a startling account. He described how, if a Roman accidentally killed a cat in Egypt, even during a time when Rome ruled the land, an enraged mob would gather and execute the person on the spot, and no authority would dare to intervene. This story, whether entirely accurate or slightly exaggerated, underscores the profound cultural taboo against harming these sacred animals. To injure or kill a cat, even by accident, was not just a crime against a person's property, It was a direct offense against the goddess Bastet herself and a threat to the cosmic order they called mad. This devotion followed them into the afterlife. We have found countless cat mummies, carefully prepared with the same meticulous rituals used for human nobles and pharaohs. Some were offerings left at the temple of Bastet in the city of Bubastes, a way for a devotee to send a prayer to the goddess, but perhaps even more touching are the many cases where cats were mummified and buried right alongside their human families. They were placed in tombs so they could journey with their owners into the next world to continue their role as protectors and companions for all eternity. This was the ultimate sign of respect and love, a bond so strong it was meant to literally last forever. But if cats were the divine protectors of the common home, baboons were the prestigious, intelligent companions of the elite. Far from the wild, chaotic creatures we might picture, baboons in ancient Egypt were highly prized possessions, symbols of immense status and a direct link to the divine. Pharaohs and high-ranking nobles would often be depicted in art with these powerful primates sitting loyally at their feet or even perched on the throne itself. This wasn't merely a display of exotic wealth, it was a profound statement about the owner's connection to Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, and the moon. The Egyptians observed the baboons' human-like behaviors, their complex social structures, and perhaps most significantly, their habit of chattering at the rising sun. They saw this not as random noise, but as the animals greeting and worshipping the sun god Ra at dawn. Because of this, baboons were considered sacred to Thoth, believed to be his earthly companions and even minor deities in their own right. To have one in your court was to have a living symbol of wisdom and divine favor by your side. These animals were more than just symbolic statues, they were highly trained and integrated into daily life. Tomb paintings and reliefs show them on leashes, being led by their handlers, but they also depict them performing tasks. There's evidence to suggest they were taught to assist in fruit harvesting, using their natural climbing skills to gather dates from tall palms. Some interpretations of art even show them participating in rituals, perhaps dancing or mimicking human actions as part of a religious ceremony. Their intelligence made them capable of learning complex tricks, and they likely served as a form of elite entertainment for royal banquets and gatherings, a dazzling display of the owner's power and ability to command even the most clever of creatures. However, domesticating a wild baboon was an incredibly dangerous and difficult endeavor. These are strong, volatile animals with sharp teeth and complex social needs. They are far from docile. The ancient Egyptians were likely capturing young baboons from the wild, a practice that would have been perilous for the hunters. Once in captivity, the challenge of keeping them healthy and manageable would have been immense. They require a specific diet, ample space, and constant mental stimulation. Without it, they can become destructive and aggressive. It's telling that only the wealthiest could afford such a pet, as it implied the means to employ a team of skilled handlers dedicated solely to the animal's care. Anecdotes from art hint at this duality. One moment, a baboon might be pictured sitting serenely beside its master. The next, it might be shown lunging or needing to be restrained, a clear nod to the unpredictable power that simmered just beneath the surface of this sophisticated companionship. While the loyalty of cats was tied to the divine and the intelligence of baboons to status, dogs in ancient Egypt carved out a role built on unwavering companionship and sheer utility. They were the practical, everyday heroes of the household and the field. The Egyptians cherished several distinct breeds, with the Tessem being the most iconic. You've likely seen this breed in hieroglyphs and tomb paintings, a sleek, muscular animal with pointed ears, a narrow waist, and a curled tail, bearing a striking resemblance to modern Basenjis or pariah dogs. Another favored breed was the Saluki, the graceful, royal dog of Egypt. revered for its incredible speed and sight, making it an unparalleled hunting companion for chasing down gazelles across the desert. A dog's life in Egypt was one of purpose and integration. In the home, they were vigilant guardians, protecting the property from intruders and alerting families to danger with their barks. But their most celebrated role was in the hunt. Pharaohs and nobles were often depicted in dramatic hunting scenes, with their loyal tessems or sleek salukis straining at the leash, ready to spring after game in the marshes or the open desert. This wasn't just sport, it was a vital method of securing food and a powerful display of the master's control over the chaotic forces of nature. The dog's ability to track, corner, and retrieve prey was invaluable, and this partnership forged a deep bond of mutual respect between human and animal. This bond is perhaps most touchingly revealed not in grand monuments, but in quiet, personal acts of grief and love. Archaeological excavations have uncovered numerous graves where dogs were buried with immense care, often within family cemeteries. These weren't discarded animals, they were cherished members of the household laid to rest with dignity. Some were found still wearing their leather collars, and in heartbreakingly tender detail, others were buried with small treats or morsels of food placed beside them, provisions for their journey to the afterlife. One particularly moving example is the tomb of a middle-class family in Abydos, where a dog was buried in its own coffin, a final act of devotion that speaks volumes about the affection these animals inspired. This deep connection between humans and dogs was also reflected in their spiritual world, most famously through the jackal-headed god Anubis. While Anubis was depicted as a jackal, the line between wild jackals and domesticated dogs was often blurred in the Egyptian mind. Jackals were a common sight skulking around the edges of cemeteries, and the Egyptians, seeking to appease these potential desecrators of graves, transformed them into their greatest protector. Anubis was the god of mummification and the guardian of the necropolis, the one who oversaw the weighing of the heart ceremony that determined a soul's fitness for the afterlife. By associating their loyal dogs with this powerful deity, the Egyptians were acknowledging the protective nature of the canine spirit. Your family dog, lying faithfully by your door, was a small, living echo of Anubis himself, a guardian not just of your home, but of your eternal soul. While baboons were symbols of divine wisdom and royal power, the ancient Egyptian elite also developed a taste for a more manageable, though no less exotic, primate, the smaller, more playful monkeys like vervets and green genons. These creatures became the ultimate live-in luxury items, a vibrant declaration of wealth and global connection. Unlike the formidable baboon, which required a team of handlers, these smaller monkeys were often kept as personal pets, primarily by the women and children of the highest-ranking families. Their presence in a household was a clear signal that this was no ordinary family. They had the means to acquire the rare and the marvelous. The very existence of these monkeys in an Egyptian home spoke of extensive trade networks and far-reaching influence. These animals were not native to the lush Nile Valley. They had to be imported at great expense from the distant lands of Nubia to the south and the fabled, almost mythical kingdom of Punt, a place the Egyptians regarded as the terrace of incense and the land of the gods. Acquiring a monkey meant financing a trading expedition that could take months, venturing into unfamiliar territories to negotiate with foreign merchants. The cost and logistics involved made these animals more valuable than the finest jewelry or the most ornate furniture. They were living, breathing proof that their owner's influence stretched to the very edges of the known world. This prized status is beautifully captured in the intimate and casual scenes of Egyptian art. Tomb paintings and reliefs frequently show these mischievous companions integrated into the daily life of the elite. In one common scene, a lavishly dressed noblewoman lounges on her chair while her pet monkey, perhaps a delicate vervet, sits beneath it, Eagerly reaching up for a bunch of grapes she dangles playfully just out of reach. In another, a young child of the household is depicted playing with the family monkey as if it were a sibling, the animal clambering onto their lap or curiously investigating a toy. These aren't formal, symbolic portraits, they are snapshots of affectionate companionship, revealing that beyond their status symbol value, these animals were genuinely loved and enjoyed for their personalities. And personality they had in abundance. Ancient texts and art hint that these monkeys were renowned for their mischievous antics, serving as a constant source of amusement and occasional frustration. They were the masters of practical jokes in a world without modern entertainment. One can easily imagine a scene of domestic chaos, a monkey snatching a wig from a sleeping servant's head and scrambling up a pillar with its prize, or overturning a carefully arranged basket of precious figs meant for a banquet. Their curious nature and nimble fingers would have made them experts at pilfering shiny objects like jewelry or cosmetics, leading to a household game of chase to retrieve the stolen item. This playful mischief was likely tolerated and even cherished, seen not as a nuisance but as an endearing quirk of a beloved family member. They brought a spark of unpredictable, joyful chaos into the highly structured and formal world of the Egyptian elite, a living reminder that even in the most powerful households, a tiny monkey could be the true ruler of the roost. But the ancient Egyptian fascination with the animal world soared to its greatest heights, quite literally, with the birds of prey that ruled their skies. Falcons and hawks were not merely admired, they were seen as nothing less than the living, breathing embodiment of the most powerful god in their entire pantheon, Horus, the celestial falcon god. To look up and see a falcon circling high above was to witness a divine manifestation, a piece of the heavens made flesh and blood. Horus was the god of the sky, of kingship, and of protection, often depicted as a man with the head of a falcon or simply as the majestic bird itself, its wings spread wide to encompass all of creation. The piercing, solar disc-like eye of the falcon was directly linked to the all-seeing Wajid eye, a symbol of royal power, health, and indestructibility. Because of this profound connection, these birds were treated with a level of reverence that surpassed even that of other sacred animals. They were living symbols of the pharaoh himself, who is considered the earthly incarnation of Horus, making their presence a constant reminder of divine authority watching over the land. This sacred status meant they were often kept in conditions befitting their divine nature. Temples dedicated to Horus and other falcon-headed deities maintained special aviaries or enclosures where these birds were cared for by teams of priests. These weren't cages in the modern sense, but rather spacious, carefully designed areas that allowed the birds to fly and perch, all within the sacred precincts of the temple. The priests who tended to them performed their duties as a holy act, ensuring the birds received the finest cuts of meat and the utmost care. The goal wasn't to fully domesticate them in the way we might a dog or a cat, but to host them, to provide a dignified residence for these divine visitors on earth. Their mere presence within the temple walls was believed to bless the entire complex and everyone within it, creating a direct channel to the power of Horus. Beyond their static role in temples, there is compelling evidence that the ancient Egyptians were among the very first people in history to practice a form of falconry. While the elaborate traditions of medieval falconry were still millennia away, tomb paintings from the New Kingdom period depict nobles holding trained birds of prey on their wrists, much like a falconer would. These scenes often show the birds wearing decorative hoods or having their jesses, the leather straps on their legs, gently held by their handlers. This suggests they were not just kept for show, they were actively used in hunting expeditions. To have a falcon, a literal piece of a god, obey your command and return to your arm after a hunt was the ultimate demonstration of a pharaoh or noble's power. It was a symbolic act of partnership with the divine, a way to harness the awesome power of Horus himself to bring down prey from the sky, reinforcing the ruler's role as the master of both the earthly and celestial realms. The depth of this devotion is most vividly preserved in the millions of falcon and hawk mummies that have been discovered at sacred sites throughout Egypt. Unlike the carefully prepared mummies of family pets, these were most often votive offerings, a person seeking the favor of Horus, perhaps asking for protection on a journey or healing for an illness, would purchase a professionally mummified falcon from the temple priests and offer it to the god. This act was believed to carry their prayer directly to the deity. The scale of this practice was industrial. Catacombs dedicated solely to these bird mummies stretch for miles underground, containing countless individual specimens, each one a silent testament to a single person's hope and faith. Modern CT scans of these mummies have revealed fascinating details about the practice. While many contain complete, well-preserved birds, others hold only partial remains, a sign that the demand for these sacred offerings sometimes outstripped the supply, yet the symbolic act of giving was what held the true power. This belief in their protective powers extended even into the architecture of the ships that plied the Nile. It was common practice for sailors to paint the figure of Horus as a falcon on the tops of their mainsails. They believed that by carrying this symbol with them, the vigilant eye of the god would see them safely through sudden storms, river currents, and other hidden dangers of their voyage. The falcon was not a distant, aloof god, but an ever-present guardian, his wings outstretched in the sail, his sharp eyes guiding the way. From the highest temples to the simplest fishing boat, the presence of the falcon was a universal promise of safety, a divine pact between the people of Egypt and the powerful god who watched over them from the boundless sky above. Yet, for all the prestige and divine association, the relationship between the pharaoh and his lions was ultimately one of carefully managed symbolism. While they may have been raised from cubs within the palace, these were never truly domesticated animals in the way we understand the term. They were apex predators, and their wild nature was an inseparable part of their power. The resources required to maintain them were staggering. A single lion could consume vast quantities of meat, premium cuts of beef, antelope, and other game every single day. This was not just a financial expenditure, but a logistical feat, demonstrating the pharaoh's ability to command the entire food chain. Their enclosures had to be immense and secure, requiring constant vigilance from teams of brave and highly specialized handlers. This was the ultimate flex of royal authority, the power to take the most dangerous creature in the known world and not only keep it captive, but force it to serve as a living ornament, a daily reminder that the king's will could tame even the savage heart of nature itself. This practice of keeping big cats for status was not limited solely to the mighty lion. There is also compelling evidence that the ancient Egyptians were among the first to forge a relationship with the cheetah, the swiftest land animal on Earth. While the evidence is more subtle than for lions, it points toward a fascinating and sophisticated understanding of animal behavior. Cheetahs, with their slender builds, non-retractable claws, and more anxious temperaments, are fundamentally different from lions. They are built for speed, not for power, and they are far less aggressive by nature. The Egyptians seem to have recognized this, and art depicts them in a different context. Rather than being shown as fierce guardians flanking a throne, cheetahs are more often illustrated in hunting scenes, poised and sleek, sometimes even wearing collars. This has led some Egyptologists to suggest that the elite may have practiced a very early form of taming cheetahs for use in hunting expeditions, much like the falcons. The concept would have been breathtaking: to accompany a royal hunt with a spotted blur of speed capable of running down the fastest gazelle, a living, breathing extension of the pharaoh's unparalleled ability to harness the natural world. Whether as hunting companions or simply as the most exotic of status symbols, the presence of both lions and cheetahs in the royal court represents the absolute peak of ancient Egyptian opulence, a statement of power so profound it required sharing one's home with the kings and queens of the wild. But the royal court's fascination with powerful predators was balanced by a much softer, more pastoral form of luxury. In the tranquil, shaded gardens of elite estates, a different kind of exotic pet roamed freely. Gazelles and ibexes, the gentle antelopes and wild goats of the desert and mountains, were captured not to display raw power, but to cultivate an atmosphere of serene beauty and harmonious grace. Imagine a private oasis within a high official's compound, date palms and sycamore fig trees offering dappled shade, a central pond filled with lotus blossoms and papyrus reeds, and moving through this carefully curated landscape, a small herd of delicate gazelles, their slender legs carrying them with an almost ethereal lightness. This was the ultimate symbol of a refined and peaceful life, a living painting of natural elegance that only the wealthiest could afford to maintain. These animals were not kept in cages, but within the high, painted walls of these private pleasure gardens, effectively creating the world's first game parks or wildlife sanctuaries for personal enjoyment. Tomb paintings from the New Kingdom offer us intimate glimpses into this practice. In one famous scene from the tomb of Nebamun, a nobleman is shown standing in his lush garden, gracefully holding out a leafy offering to a gazelle that stands before him, tentatively stretching its neck to accept the treat. The animal is not tethered or restrained, it is a willing participant in this moment of quiet connection. Another relief might show a lady of the house seated on an ornate chair with an ibex, its magnificent curved horns clearly depicted, resting calmly at her feet as if it were the most natural thing in the world. These images are not about domination over nature, but rather a desire to exist in a perfected, idealized version of it, where the wild and the civilized could coexist in perfect peace. Beyond their role as living ornaments, these graceful creatures were deeply woven into the fabric of Egyptian religious symbolism, particularly concerning themes of fertility and the rejuvenating power of nature. The gazelle, for instance, was associated with the goddess Anubis, a powerful deity of the Nile cataracts and the life-giving inundation. As the river's annual flood receded, leaving behind fertile black silt perfect for sowing crops, gazelles would often descend from the desert's edge to graze on the new shoots. Their appearance was therefore seen as a direct blessing from Anubis, a sign of the land's renewed vitality and abundance. To have them in your garden was to capture a piece of that divine promise, a constant reminder of the cyclical rebirth that sustained all of Egypt. The ibex, with its incredible agility and ability to climb the most treacherous cliff faces, was linked to other, more complex deities. Its distinctive crescent-shaped horns resonated with lunar symbolism, connecting it to gods like Thoth and Khonsu, who govern the moon and time. Furthermore, the ibex was a creature of the liminal zones, the border between the fertile black land of the Nile and the deadly red land of the desert. It embodied a kind of untamable wildness that the Egyptians both respected and sought to understand. By bringing an ibex into a controlled garden environment, a noble was perhaps attempting to bridge that gap, to harness its potent, wild energy and align it with the ordered, civilized world of the estate. It was an attempt to make the mysterious and the untamed a comforting, beautiful part of daily life, a testament to the ancient Egyptian desire to find divinity and meaning in every creature, from the mightiest lion to the most delicate gazelle. And yet, for all the serene beauty of a noble's private menagerie, the ancient Egyptians understood that true power often came with a dose of inherent danger. This brings us to one of the most complex and contradictory relationships they had with any animal, their connection to snakes. In the modern world, we largely view snakes with a mix of fear and revulsion, but to the people of the Nile, These reptiles were a potent paradox, simultaneously a deadly threat lurking in the grain stores and a sacred protector resting on the brow of the pharaoh himself. This dual nature made the snake an utterly fascinating and utterly unpredictable presence in the Egyptian home and state. The most immediate and practical interaction with snakes was as a natural, albeit risky, form of pest control. Just as cats were valued for hunting rodents, certain non-venomous snakes like the common grass snake were likely tolerated, or even encouraged, to live in the storage areas of homes and granaries. These silent hunters would slither through the dark corners, efficiently preying on the mice and rats that threatened to consume the family's precious food supply. For a farmer or a merchant, having a resident snake was a practical solution to a constant problem. It was a delicate, unspoken agreement. The snake received a steady source of food and shelter, and the human family benefited from its hunting prowess. This was a relationship built on mutual benefit and a healthy respect for the animal's capabilities, a cautious coexistence that stopped well short of the affection shown to a dog or a cat. But this pragmatic tolerance was always shadowed by a very real and well-founded fear. The Egyptian cobra, known as the urius, was a constant and lethal danger. Its potent neurotoxic venom could kill an adult in a matter of hours, and its habit of raising its iconic hood when threatened made it an instantly recognizable symbol of imminent death. A surprise encounter with a cobra in one's home or out in the fields was a legitimate nightmare scenario. This ever-present peril forged a powerful mythology around the snake. It was seen as a creature of both chaos and protection, a duality the Egyptian mind excelled at reconciling. They told stories of the great serpent god Apep, the embodiment of chaos and darkness, who attempted to devour the sun god Ra each night as he journeyed through the underworld. This myth gave a name and a form to the universal fear of the dark and the unknown, with the snake as its perfect avatar. Yet, in a stunning act of symbolic alchemy, the Egyptians took this very symbol of fear and death and transformed it into their ultimate emblem of divine protection and sovereign power. They did this by adopting the image of the rearing Egyptian cobra, the urius, and placing it prominently on the crown of the pharaoh. This was not a mere decoration, it was a piece of active, spiritual armor. The urius was believed to be the fiery eye of the sun god Ra, a goddess in her own right named Wadjet. Her job was to protect the king by spitting flames of divine fire at his enemies, incinerating any who would dare to challenge his divine right to rule. When you looked upon the pharaoh, you were not just looking at a man, you were looking at a living god whose very brow was guarded by the most feared predator in the land. It was a brilliant piece of political and religious theater, proclaiming that the king had so completely mastered the forces of chaos that he could wear its greatest symbol as his personal protector. This reverence extended beyond symbolism. There is evidence that cobras were actually kept within the royal court, not as casual pets, but as sacred charges under the care of specialized priests. These handlers would have possessed a deep, esoteric knowledge of the snake's behavior, likely using tools similar to those of a modern snake charmer to safely manage them for rituals or appearances. The danger involved in this custodianship was immense, reinforcing the idea that only the pharaoh, with his divine mandate, could command such a deadly force. The line between a revered divine symbol and a terrifyingly real animal was incredibly thin. The story of Cleopatra's suicide, while likely a myth propagated by Roman poets, captures this duality perfectly. Her chosen method of death, according to legend, was the bite of an asp, another term for the Egyptian cobra. In this narrative, the ultimate symbol of pharaonic power became the instrument of the last pharaoh's end, a final, dramatic testament to the snake's enduring and paradoxical role as both the protector of the kingdom and the bringer of its final demise. While the powerful and the exotic often steal the spotlight, some of the most cherished pets in ancient Egypt were the ones that filled the air with music and color. Beyond the divine falcons and hawks, the Egyptians maintained a deep and practical affection for a whole host of other birds, creating elaborate aviaries that transformed their homes and gardens into private sanctuaries of life and song. This wasn't just a hobby for the elite, it was a widespread practice that brought daily joy, sustenance, and a touch of wild beauty into the lives of many. Ducks, geese, pigeons, and even elegant cranes were not merely livestock, they were valued members of the household, appreciated as much for their personalities and beauty as for the practical benefits they provided. The evidence for this vibrant aspect of daily life is painted directly onto the walls of tombs, particularly in the vast necropolis at Thebes. These weren't symbolic images of gods or scenes of conquest, they were intimate portraits of the life the deceased hoped to continue enjoying forever. In the tomb of Nebamun, for instance, we see a breathtakingly detailed scene of his estate's lush marshes and ponds teeming with life. A servant is shown carefully gathering eggs from a nest, while nearby, a beautifully painted aviary houses a variety of waterfowl. The artist took great care to capture the distinct plumage of each bird, the iridescent green head of a male duck, the stark white of an Egyptian goose, the soft gray of a pigeon. This attention to detail tells us that these birds were observed and adored for their aesthetic qualities, not just seen as walking meals. The roles these birds played were wonderfully diverse. Ducks and geese were, of course, vital sources of eggs and meat, providing a reliable and renewable source of protein for the family table, but their value went far beyond the pantry. Their presence in courtyard ponds and enclosed gardens added movement, sound, and a sense of tranquil abundance. Imagine the peaceful atmosphere of an Egyptian home, with the soft quacking of ducks and the honking of geese providing a constant, gentle soundtrack to daily life. Pigeons and doves, often kept in elaborate coats tower-like structures with many small nesting holes, were equally valuable. Their soft, cooing calls were considered a soothing and pleasant sound, and their constant fluttering activity brought a dynamic energy to the home. For the more affluent, the pursuit of bird keeping became an art form in itself. They constructed extensive, walk-in aviaries, intricate enclosures made of finely carved wood, and netting that allowed birds to fly freely in a protected environment. These were the centerpieces of their pleasure gardens. Here, they might keep more exotic songbirds imported from Nubia, or the magnificent demoiselle crane, celebrated for its graceful dancing courtship rituals. To stroll through one's garden and hear the chorus of different songs, to watch the flash of colorful wings against the green of the papyrus and the blue of the pond, was to experience a sensory delight that showcased the owner's taste and their ability to curate a perfect, harmonious microcosm of the natural world. This connection was so profound that it, too, followed the Egyptians into the afterlife. Just as they mummified their cats and dogs, we have found numerous bird mummies placed in tombs. A noblewoman might be buried with her favorite songbird, so its music could comfort her in the next world. A pharaoh's provisions for eternity might include mummified ducks and geese, ensuring he would never want for food. These acts reveal a truth that goes deeper than practicality or even aesthetics. The ancient Egyptians found a genuine, heartfelt companionship in the animals that shared their world. From the protective cat to the loyal dog, from the mischievous monkey to the singing dove, each creature offered a unique connection to the forces of life, nature, and the divine, making their world richer, louder, and infinitely more wonderful. But if there was one creature that perfectly encapsulated the ancient Egyptian principle of duality, the constant, precarious balance between order and chaos, life and death, reverence and terror, it was undoubtedly the crocodile. This was not a pet one kept for cuddles or amusement. This was a relationship forged in the deep, murky waters of the Nile itself, a river that was both the source of all life and a place of unimaginable danger. To understand the Egyptian people, you had to understand their river, and to understand their river, you had to understand the crocodile. In the fertile, life-giving Nile, the crocodile was the absolute apex predator, a prehistoric monster that had not changed for millions of years and had no need to. It was a master of ambush, capable of exploding from the calm water with unimaginable force to drag a full-grown cow, a lone fisherman, or even an unwary child beneath the surface to a gruesome death. For the common farmer drawing water or the mother washing clothes at the riverbank, the crocodile was a very real and ever-present nightmare. This raw, primal fear could have easily made it a universally hated creature, a demon to be eradicated. But the Egyptian mind, with its profound talent for finding the sacred in the terrifying, did something extraordinary. They looked at this perfect killing machine and saw not just a monster, but a god. They named him Sobek, and he was a deity of immense power and paradoxical nature. Sobek was the god of the Nile's military might, of its sudden, ferocious strength. He was also associated with pharaonic power, fertility, and even protection. His name might be invoked by a soldier going into battle, hoping to channel the crocodile's ruthless strength and impenetrable hide. This reverence led to the establishment of a city dedicated entirely to his worship, Crocodilopolis, in the Fayum region. At the heart of this city was a vast temple complex centered around a specially designed, lavish pool. This was not a prison for a dangerous animal, it was a luxury suite for a living god. Within this pool resided the Chosen One, the sacred crocodile, believed to be the living incarnation of Sobek himself. This crocodile, named Petsuchos, meaning he of Sobek, was treated with a level of opulence that is almost hard to fathom. The priests of the temple, who served as his full-time caretakers, adorned him with priceless jewelry. Solid gold rings were carefully placed around his claws, and intricate bracelets of gold and precious gemstones like lapis lazuli and turquoise were fastened around his powerful legs. He was fed a diet that would shame most royal banquets: choice cuts of meat, roasted fowl, and honey cakes, all offered to him by the priests on golden platters. The people would travel from all over Egypt to make offerings and seek the god's favor, hoping that by pleasing his earthly form, Sobek would protect them from the river's dangers and grant them strength and fertility. When one Petsuchos eventually died, his body was mummified with the utmost care and ceremony, and a new sacred crocodile was selected from the Nile to take his place, ensuring the divine presence never left the temple. The idea of taming such a creature seems impossible, yet there are tantalizing hints that some priests, through generations of close observation, may have developed a method of coexistence that bordered on a form of domestication. The Greek historian Herodotus, ever fascinated by Egypt, wrote about priests who could allegedly command the crocodiles, calling them from the water and even holding their jaws open. While this is certainly exaggerated, it likely stems from a kernel of truth. These priests would have known the animal's habits intimately, their feeding times, their reactions to certain sounds, their basking preferences. They may have used a consistent feeding call, conditioning the crocodiles to associate the priests with food, thus making them more approachable. This wasn't friendship in any mammalian sense. It was a dangerous, respectful form of animal management, a testament to the priests' profound understanding of the creature they both worshipped and feared. This practice of keeping crocodiles was not entirely confined to the temple. There are fragments of evidence, from rare inscriptions and tantalizing art, that suggest a handful of the most powerful nobles, perhaps even a pharaoh or two, attempted to keep young crocodiles within the pools of their private estates. This would have been the ultimate, most audacious status symbol imaginable, to have a literal god, albeit a juvenile one, swimming in your garden pond was a declaration of power so absolute it defied belief. It screamed, "I do not merely command men, I command the forces of nature and the gods themselves." One can only imagine the mix of awe and sheer terror such a pet would have inspired in visitors. The constant, low-level anxiety of knowing a creature with the power to kill you in an instant was just on the other side of the garden wall would have been a permanent feature of life in that household. It was a possession that came with its own built-in, lethal consequence, a daily reminder that even for the elite, living with a god was a privilege that walked hand in hand with peril. But if keeping a crocodile was the ultimate display of audacious power, then perhaps the most unexpectedly charming and paradoxical pet of all was the hippopotamus. To our modern eyes, the idea of keeping a hippo as a pet seems utterly insane. We rightly know them as one of Africa's most dangerous and territorial animals, responsible for more human deaths on the continent than any other large mammal. They are colossal, unpredictable tanks of muscle with razor-sharp tusks, capable of biting a full-grown crocodile in half, and yet, the ancient Egyptians, in their endless quest to find harmony with the natural world, saw past this fearsome reputation to a different, more nurturing aspect of the creature's spirit. This softer side was embodied by the goddess Taweret, whose name literally means the Great One. She was one of the most important and beloved household deities, a protector of women and children, specifically during the incredibly dangerous processes of childbirth and infancy. In a time of high infant mortality, Taweret was a source of immense comfort and hope, and her form is unforgettable. She is depicted as a composite creature, standing upright on her hind legs, part pregnant hippo, part lion, and part crocodile. She has the bloated body and head of a hippo, the mane and tail of a lion, and the back and tail of a crocodile, often shown resting a hand on the saw, a magical protective symbol. This terrifying appearance was precisely the point. The Egyptians believed that to ward off the evil spirits that threatened a mother and her newborn, you needed a protector more frightening than the threats themselves. Taweret's hippo form represented protective maternal ferocity, the ultimate mother who would stop at nothing to defend her young. This divine connection is what made the idea of keeping a real hippo not just a possibility, but a deeply religious act for the highest echelons of society. There is evidence, particularly from the Middle Kingdom period, that a few pharaohs and incredibly wealthy nobles attempted to keep these behemoths in the vast, specially constructed ponds within their palace or temple complexes. The most famous potential example is the William hippopotamus, a beautiful blue faience statuette now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which was found in a tomb. While it was likely a symbolic object, its existence points to a cultural fascination. More concrete evidence comes from archaeological finds of hippo bones in non-native, confined contexts and inscriptions that hint at the practice. The logistics of such an endeavor were, of course, mind-boggling. First, you had to capture a young calf, a task that would have been phenomenally dangerous for the hunters, likely involving separating the baby from its notoriously aggressive mother. Then came the challenge of transport, probably on a reinforced barge along the Nile. Once arrived, the animal required an enormous, constantly refreshed body of water to submerge in, as its skin must remain wet to avoid cracking and overheating. The daily food requirement would have been staggering. A full-grown hippo can consume over 80 pounds of vegetation a day. This wasn't just a pet, it was a massive, ongoing public works project and a constant drain on resources, a spectacle of wealth so profound that it could literally divert a section of the Nile to keep a god happy. So why go through all this trouble? For the nobility, it was the ultimate statement. It demonstrated a control over nature so complete that you could take the most dangerous animal in the river and transform it into a placid, pond-dwelling ornament. But on a deeper level, it was about harnessing the protective power of Taweret herself by having a living incarnation of her primary animal attribute residing on your property. You were inviting her benevolent, protective energy into your very home. It was believed that the presence of the hippo would safeguard the women of the household, ensuring healthy pregnancies and safe deliveries. This transforms the hippo from a simple status symbol into a powerful, living talisman, a direct channel to divine protection where it was needed most. But for all the power and prestige associated with the hippo and the crocodile, perhaps the most universally beloved and ever-present creature in an ancient Egyptian's life was also the smallest and most humble, the humble dung beetle, known to us as the scarab. It might seem bizarre to us today, the idea of keeping a beetle as a pet, but to the Egyptian mind, this unassuming insect was nothing less than a miniature god rolling the very sun across the sky each day. Their connection to the scarab wasn't born from fear or a desire to display raw power, but from a profound and beautiful observation of the natural world that they then elevated into one of their most powerful spiritual symbols. The Egyptians watched the scarab beetle going about its daily work with a sense of awe and recognition. They saw the male beetle meticulously shaping a ball of dung, a process that was both practical and poetic. He would roll this ball across the ground, often with a female beetle riding atop it, to a suitable spot where he would bury it. From this ball of waste, new life would emerge as a larva, which would eventually dig its way up to the surface as a fully formed adult beetle. To an agricultural society that depended on the cycles of life, death, and rebirth, this was a breathtaking metaphor playing out right at their feet. They saw the dung ball as the sun, being pushed from the eastern horizon at dawn to the western horizon at dusk by a divine force. They saw the beetle's emergence from the earth as a symbol of spontaneous creation and resurrection, a promise that new life could always come from darkness. This entire cycle led them to associate the scarab with Khepri, the god of the morning sun, whose name means, "he who is coming into being." Khepri was depicted as a man with a scarab for a head, or simply as the beetle itself, and he was the divine engine that renewed the sun each and every day. This deep symbolic meaning made the scarab the most popular amulet in all of Egyptian history. Millions upon millions of scarab amulets have been found, made from everything from humble baked clay and steatite to the most precious lapis lazuli and gold. People wore them as rings, strung them on necklaces, and sewed them into their mummy wrappings, but beyond these inanimate charms, there is compelling evidence that people actually kept live scarab beetles as personal companions and lucky charms. Imagine a scribe at his desk, a small, beautifully carved stone or faience container sitting open beside his papyrus. Inside, a glossy black beetle might be crawling over a few bits of dung provided for its comfort. This wasn't considered strange or unhygienic. It was like having a tiny, living piece of a god right there with you, a constant source of protection and a reminder of the eternal cycle of renewal. The daily care for such a pet was simple, yet it had to be consistent. The beetle would need a small amount of fresh dung to form into its ball, and the container would need to have a substrate of sand or soft earth into which it could burrow to feel secure. These containers were often works of art in themselves, pierced with small holes for air, and sometimes carved or painted with images of Khepri or spells for protection and health. To carry a live scarab was to carry a personal, active connection to the forces of creation. Its very presence was believed to ward off evil and guarantee the wearer's own heart would not bear false witness in the final judgment. It was the smallest pet one could keep, but it carried the weight of the entire cosmos on its tiny, iridescent back, while the hippo and crocodile represented immense, fearsome power, and the scarab embodied cosmic renewal. The ancient Egyptians also found beauty, tranquility, and divine meaning in the graceful creatures that swam through the life-giving waters of the Nile. For both the common family and the elite, fish were not just a vital food source, they became living ornaments, spiritual symbols, and cherished features of the Egyptian home, adding a dimension of serene movement to their carefully crafted worlds. The most practical relationship with fish was, of course, through sustenance. The Nile was teeming with life, and species like the tilapia and the massive Nile perch were staples of the Egyptian diet, caught by fishermen with nets and spears to feed their families and sell in bustling marketplaces. But the Egyptian ingenuity for animal husbandry didn't stop at the riverbank. Evidence suggests they developed early forms of aquaculture, creating managed ponds and canals on their estates where they could breed and raise fish, ensuring a reliable, renewable supply of food right at their doorstep. This was a brilliant solution to food security, a way to harness the river's bounty in a controlled environment. For the wealthy, however, these ponds evolved far beyond simple holding tanks for future meals. They became elaborate, decorative centerpieces of their sprawling pleasure gardens. Imagine the compound of a high official. Date palms and sycamore figs provide dappled shade, the air is fragrant with blooming lotus flowers, and the gentle sound of water trickling from a fountain fills the air. At the heart of this oasis is a large, rectangular pond, its crystal clear water lined with blue glazed tiles, and gliding through this water are schools of glittering fish, their scales flashing gold and silver in the sunlight. These were not fish destined for the table, they were kept purely for aesthetic enjoyment, living art that moved in a silent, graceful ballet. Tomb paintings from the New Kingdom, like those in the tomb of the Vizier Ramos, show these idyllic scenes with remarkable detail, depicting the noble owner and his wife strolling beside their ornamental pond, enjoying the cool breeze and the beautiful sight of the fish dancing beneath the water's surface. This appreciation for their beauty was deeply intertwined with their religious significance. The Egyptians saw divine patterns in the natural behavior of all animals, and fish were no exception. The tilapia, for instance, held a particularly sacred role. The female tilapia has a unique reproductive strategy known as mouthbrooding. After laying her eggs, she carefully gathers them into her mouth, where they are fertilized and then protected until the fry are large enough to swim on their own. To the Egyptian mind, this was a powerful, natural symbol of protection and rebirth. They saw the mother fish giving life from her own mouth, an act that resonated with their beliefs about the power of the spoken word and creation. Because of this, the tilapia became strongly associated with the goddess Hatmehit, whose very name means foremost of the fishes. She was a primordial goddess of the Nile Delta, worshipped as a protective deity and a nurturer. To keep tilapia in your pond was to invite the protective, life-giving energy of Hatmehit into your garden. Other fish species were linked to different aspects of the spiritual world. The Oxyrhynchus fish, a distinct species with a sharply pointed snout, was venerated in the city of Permejde because it was believed to have eaten the penis of the god Osiris after his brother Seth dismembered him and threw the pieces into the Nile. This bizarre myth made the fish both a sacred creature connected to the Osiris mythos and a taboo food item for the priests in that region. The Phagris fish was also considered sacred in some areas, and the mighty Nile perch, with its impressive size, was sometimes associated with the goddess Neith, a powerful creator deity. This complex web of associations meant that an ornamental pond was never just a pond, it was a miniature, managed ecosystem thrumming with divine presence, each species a reminder of a different story from the vast tapestry of Egyptian mythology. The integration of these fish ponds into the architecture of elite homes and temples reveals a society that sought to blur the lines between the built environment and the natural world. They weren't trying to conquer nature, but to curate it, to create a perfect, harmonious microcosm where the beauty of the wild could be safely enjoyed and its divine messages contemplated. The gentle movement of the fish, The play of light on the water and the cool peace of the garden provided a sensory escape, a place for contemplation and leisure that was both a testament to the owner's wealth and a deeply personal spiritual practice. In the silent, gliding journey of a fish, the ancient Egyptians saw the flowing of the Nile, the cycle of life, and the graceful, ever-moving hand of the gods. But amidst the grand scale of crocodiles and the cosmic weight of scarabs, the ancient Egyptians also found room in their hearts for a much smaller, spikier companion, the humble hedgehog. Far from being overlooked, these tiny, insect-eating mammals were deeply appreciated for both their practical utility and their rich, symbolic power, becoming one of the more unexpectedly charming members of the ancient Egyptian household. In the cool, dark corners of a home or a granary, a resident hedgehog would be a welcome sight, tirelessly snuffling through the dust to hunt for scorpions, beetles, and other unwanted pests. This made them a natural, chemical-free form of pest control, a living ally in the constant battle to protect food stores and keep living spaces safe from venomous bites and stings. Their value is so recognized that they were often captured from the wild and provided with small, designated enclosures, perhaps a ceramic pot or a woven basket turned on its side, where they could be safely kept and easily observed. Yet the Egyptians saw far more in the hedgehog than just a useful insectivore. They were utterly fascinated by its unique behaviors, which they interpreted through their spiritual lens. Artists frequently depicted them on small amulets and tomb reliefs, often shown in a particularly curious pose, rolling over on a piece of fruit. Modern observation confirms this behavior. A hedgehog will often roll onto a fruit or a plant to impale it on its spines, then carry the prize back to its nest to eat later. To the ancient Egyptian mind, this wasn't just a clever feeding strategy, it was a powerful symbol of resourcefulness and provision. They saw the animal gathering the bounty of the land and carrying it safely home, a tiny, spiny embodiment of abundance and preparation. This symbolism was profoundly deepened by the hedgehog's annual cycle of hibernation. Each year, as the heat faded, the hedgehog would disappear, burrowing deep into the earth to enter a state of suspended animation, a sleep so deep it appeared lifeless. Then, with the return of the sun's warmth and the life-giving inundation of the Nile, it would miraculously re-emerge from the ground, alive and well. This dramatic annual death and rebirth made the hedgehog a perfect, natural symbol for resurrection and the eternal cycle of life. Its emergence from the earth mirrored the sun god Ra's rebirth at dawn and the journey of the human soul through the underworld. To keep a hedgehog was to have a living, breathing symbol of hope and renewal right in your own home, a daily reminder that life could always triumph over darkness. While the elite marveled at the grace of gazelles and the divine power of falcons, the true engine of Egyptian civilization relied on a far more humble and steadfast creature, the donkey. These rugged, dependable animals were the trucks and tractors of the ancient world, the indispensable partners of the common farmer, the merchant, and the state itself. Unlike the exotic pets kept for pleasure or prestige, the donkey was a pet of pure, unwavering practicality, a beloved member of the family whose value is measured in sweat and endurance rather than jewels or divine connection. From the earliest periods, donkeys were the primary beasts of burden, tasked with the backbreaking work that built the pyramids and fed the cities. They trudged in endless lines, carrying heavy loads of grain from the fields to the granaries, hauling water to remote work sites, and transporting blocks of stone from quarries to the great construction projects that defined pharaonic ambition. A farmer's donkey was quite literally his strongest employee, a four-legged engine of economic survival. The bond between an Egyptian and their donkey was one of mutual dependence and deep familiarity. These animals were not kept in distant stables, but lived in close proximity to the family, often sheltered in a simple enclosure attached to the home. They were given names, spoken to, and cared for with a thoughtful understanding of their needs. Archaeological evidence shows they were fed a diet of barley and emmer wheat, the same staples that sustained their human owners, and were provided with sturdy, woven baskets and panniers to make their loads easier to carry. Tomb models from the Middle Kingdom often depict lively scenes of daily life, including donkeys being laden with goods or led by their handlers, capturing their central role in the rhythm of existence. This was a partnership forged in shared labor, a quiet, enduring friendship between species that powered an empire. The arrival of the horse in Egypt, however, marked a dramatic shift from practical partnership to unparalleled prestige. Horses were not native to the Nile Valley. They were introduced relatively late, around the time of the Hyksos invasion in the Second Intermediate Period, roughly 1600 years before the Common Era. The Hyksos, a people from Western Asia, brought with them advanced technology, including the horse-drawn chariot. The Egyptians, initially overwhelmed by this powerful new weapon, quickly adopted and perfected it, transforming the horse from a foreign curiosity into the ultimate symbol of royal power and military might. Unlike the donkey, which was for everyone, the horse was exclusively for the elite, a living, breathing luxury car that screamed wealth, status, and divine right authority. The care and keeping of a horse was an extravagant undertaking that only the state or the highest echelons of society could afford. They required specialized handlers, expert trainers, and vast quantities of high-quality fodder. Stables were not simple sheds but carefully managed facilities where each animal was known by name and its health meticulously monitored. The tack and equipment were objects of art in themselves. Chariots were crafted from lightweight imported wood and covered in gold leaf and electrum, while harnesses were made of the finest leather and decorated with intricate patterns. A pharaoh's chariot horses were his pride and joy, often depicted in reliefs with names like Victorious in Thebes or Great of Strength, their muscles rippling as they charged into battle or paraded before adoring crowds. In military contexts, the chariot became the elite special forces of the Egyptian army. A single chariot team consisted of a driver, an archer, and 2 horses, moving with a speed and agility that infantry could not match. The sight and sound of 100 such chariots charging across the desert, the sun glinting off their gold fittings and the plumes on the horses' heads streaming behind them, must have been a terrifying and awe-inspiring spectacle. But the horses' role extended far beyond the battlefield. In times of peace, they were the centerpiece of grand ceremonial processions. The pharaoh would stand tall in his chariot, his prized horses pulling him through the streets during religious festivals like the beautiful Feast of the Valley, demonstrating his control over these powerful, noble creatures and, by extension, his mastery over the entire kingdom. The donkey was the workhorse of the people, but the horse was the soaring emblem of the king, a creature of such prestige that its very presence defined the height of ancient Egyptian power and elegance. Yet for all their symbolic power and deep integration into daily life, the creatures we've met so far were largely native to the Nile Valley or its immediate surroundings. The true measure of a pharaoh's influence, however, was not just in taming the wild at home, but in his ability to command the impossible, to bring the utterly foreign and the fantastical to his very doorstep. This is where we enter the realm of the royal menagerie, a living collection of wonders that included giraffes, bears, and leopards, creatures so alien to the Egyptian landscape that their very presence was a shock to the senses and a thunderous declaration of a ruler's global reach. The most breathtaking of these living imports was undoubtedly the giraffe, or the seret, as the Egyptians called it. Imagine the scene on the docks of Thebes as a trading ship from the fabled land of Punt finally arrives after months at sea. Among the cargo of rare incense, ebony logs, and exotic skins, a strange head on an impossibly long neck rises above the railing, looking down on the gathered crowd with a calm, curious eye. The animal's graceful descent down the gangplank, its spotted coat shimmering in the sun, would have been a moment of pure theater. This was not just an animal, it was a walking monument to the pharaoh's power. To orchestrate the capture, transport, and survival of such a delicate and enormous creature from the distant forests of Punt required a staggering investment of resources and logistical genius. It was a feat that screamed of a network of diplomats, merchants, and explorers whose sole purpose was to satisfy the king's desire for the marvelous. Once in Egypt, the giraffe was more than a pet, it was a living symbol of the cosmos itself. The Egyptians saw profound meaning in its form. Its enormously long neck, which allowed it to browse the highest leaves, connected the earth to the heavens. Its patterned coat was seen as a map of the stars, a celestial chart walking upon the earth. This made the giraffe a perfect embodiment of the pharaoh's own role as the intermediary between the gods and the people. In court ceremonies, the presence of this serene, otherworldly creature would have left foreign ambassadors and nobles in a state of awe, silently testifying that the ruler who could command such a beast from the edge of the world was himself touched by the divine. From the frigid highlands of Syria came another astonishing import, the bear. While the Egyptian word for bear, doubtfully identified creature, remains uncertain, the presence of bear remains in artistic depictions confirms that these powerful animals from the north did indeed grace the palaces of the pharaohs. Unlike the relatively predictable herbivores, a bear represented a different kind of power, raw, untamed, and formidable. The challenge of acquiring one was immense. Syrian bears were not items of trade, they were prizes, likely acquired through diplomatic gift exchange with the kingdoms of the Levant or through military campaigns. Bringing a healthy bear down the coast by ship, keeping it fed and watered, and then housing it securely in the heat of Egypt was a testament to the pharaoh's ability to overcome the natural order itself. Within the royal court, the bear served as a potent symbol of the king's ability to dominate even the most ferocious forces of nature. While a lion was a native symbol of power, a bear was an exotic, foreign power brought to heel. It represented the extent of the pharaoh's reach, showing that his influence could tame the dangers of distant, snowy mountains that his people had never even seen. Its containment in a specially built enclosure would have been a public spectacle, a display of control that blurred the line between royal collection and a curated exhibit of conquered nature. The low, rumbling growl of a Syrian bear in an Egyptian palace was the sound of an empire's ambition made flesh, and then there was the leopard, or Nemes, an animal that combined terrifying power with sublime elegance. While leopards were sometimes found in the desert fringes of Egypt, they were incredibly rare and elusive. The ones that appeared in royal processions were often specifically imported from Nubia or deeper into Africa, chosen for their perfect, rosette-spotted coats. The leopard's skin held immense religious significance, as it was the ceremonial garment of the Sem priests, the high officials who performed the crucial opening of the mouth ritual to reanimate mummies for the afterlife. By keeping live leopards, the pharaoh was not just displaying a dangerous predator, he was curating the very source of a potent religious symbol. These animals were often highly trained, not for hunting, but for ceremony. There are depictions of leopards, apparently tame and collared, walking regally in religious processions alongside priests. The message was multifaceted. It showed the pharaoh's control over the chaotic wilderness. It demonstrated his piety by providing the sacred animals associated with ritual, and it showcased his wealth through the extreme cost and skill required to train such a creature. A docile leopard walking peacefully through a crowd was a more powerful symbol of authority than 100 chained captives. It was the wild itself, willingly in service to the crown. Together, the giraffe, the bear, and the leopard formed a living map of the known world. a testament to the pharaoh's power that reached from the equatorial forests of Punt to the northern mountains of Syria. Their care required a permanent staff of specialized keepers, veterinarians, and trainers, turning the palace grounds into a prototype of a modern zoo. The din and smell of this collection would have been overwhelming, a symphony of alien roars, grunts, and calls, a constant reminder to everyone who heard it that their ruler commanded not just a nation, but the wonders of the entire world. These menageries were the ultimate expression of divine kingship, proving that the pharaoh's power was so absolute it could gather the farthest corners of creation and place them all within the walls of his own home. This deep desire for an eternal bond with their animal companions found its most profound and lasting expression in the practice of mummification. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end but a transition, a journey to an afterlife that mirrored the world they knew and loved. And just as a noble would never dream of embarking on that journey without their finest jewelry, their favorite furniture, and provisions for eternity, they certainly would not go without the beloved creatures that had shared their earthly lives. This was the ultimate act of love and devotion, to ensure a pet's spirit, or its ba, could make the same journey and live alongside them forever in the field of reeds. The process of animal mummification was a sacred art, performed with the same reverence and meticulous care as it was for humans. It began with the delicate removal of the internal organs, which were often placed in special jars called canopic jars, though sometimes they were treated and replaced within the body cavity. The body was then thoroughly dried using natron, a special salt harvested from the shores of desert lakes. This natural desiccant drew out all moisture from the tissues, preventing decay and preserving the body for eternity. The next stage was an elaborate wrapping, using hundreds of yards of fine linen strips. The wrappers, often priests specially trained for the task, would carefully arrange the animal in a lifelike pose, a cat curled as if in sleep, a falcon with its wings folded gracefully, a dog lying down with its head resting on its paws. Amulets and sacred charms were tucked between the linen layers to provide magical protection on the perilous journey through the underworld. The final package was often coated in resin, which acted as a preservative and gave the mummy a dark, glossy sheen before being placed within a decorated coffin. The variety of animals chosen for this eternal honor is a direct window into the Egyptian heart. While we have the grand, ceremonial mummies of sacred bulls and ibises offered by the millions to gods, the most touching are the personal pets. We have found countless cat mummies, some so small they were clearly beloved kittens who died young. Dogs were buried with their leather collars still on, their names sometimes etched into the leather. Baboons were carefully positioned, and even gazelles and monkeys were given this sacred treatment. The care taken with these creatures speaks not of a mass religious industry, but of individual grief and affection. In the workmen's village of Deir el-Medina, archaeologists found a tomb where a family had buried their pet dog with such care, its body placed in a specially made wooden coffin, that the emotion behind the act feels as fresh today as it was 3,000 years ago. This emotional bond is perhaps most vividly illustrated by the elaborate burial goods and sarcophagi crafted for these animals. These were not simple boxes. Artisans created beautiful, custom-shaped coffins for their furry, feathered, and scaly clients. A cat might be laid to rest in a bronze coffin shaped like the goddess Bastet, its head a finely detailed likeness of the feline deity. A prized hunting dog could be buried in a wooden box painted to mimic the grand tombs of its master, complete with false doors for its spirit to pass through. Ibis mummies were sealed inside large pottery jars decorated with the face of the god Thoth, while falcons were entombed in caskets that replicated a shrine. And just as a human would be buried with everything they might need, so too were pets. We find tiny mummified mice and bowls of milk placed beside a cat's mummy, so it would never go hungry. A dog's grave might include its favorite leather ball or a well-chewed bone. These weren't just objects, they were love letters written for eternity, ensuring a beloved companion would want for nothing in the world to come. Through this incredible practice, the ancient Egyptians ensured that the joyful bark, the contented purr, and the loyal presence they cherished in life would continue unbroken for all time. Caring for these extraordinary animals was a daily commitment that blended practical knowledge with deep affection, and the ancient Egyptians approached it with remarkable sophistication. For the common family with a dog or cat, feeding was a simple matter of sharing their own resources. Archaeological excavations at workmen's villages like Deir el-Medina reveal food scraps and bones left in areas where pets lived, showing they were given table scraps, bits of bread, fish, and meat. But for the prized hunting dogs of the elite, the diet was far more curated. These animals received premium cuts. We know from tomb offerings and artistic scenes that a noble's prized saluki or tessum was fed choice beef, antelope, and even roasted fowl to keep it in peak physical condition for the hunt. This wasn't just about sustenance. A well-fed, muscular dog was a visible status symbol, reflecting the wealth and generosity of its master. Grooming was another essential part of pet care, especially for animals living in close quarters with people. Tomb scenes often show monkeys being deloused by patient servants, a necessary task for an animal that would be climbing on furniture and people. Dogs were regularly brushed and cleaned, as evidenced by the well-preserved remains found with healthy coats. Perhaps the most touching evidence of this care comes from veterinary medicine. The Kahan Papyrus, one of the oldest veterinary texts in existence dating back to around 1850 years before the Common Era, contains specific instructions for treating ailments in dogs. It provides remedies for eye infections, skin conditions, and even recommendations for what to do if a dog is bitten by a snake. This shows they weren't just tending to animals on a whim, they were developing a systematic, written body of medical knowledge to ensure their companions' well-being. Control and safety were paramount, especially for larger or more unpredictable pets. The use of leashes and collars is documented everywhere in Egyptian art. Dogs are almost always shown wearing broad collars, often made of leather and sometimes dyed or decorated. These weren't just for restraint, many collars had the dog's name inscribed on a metal or ivory tag. We have examples of names like Reliable, Brave One, or North Wind, giving each animal a distinct identity. Leashes were used not only for dogs but also for the baboons and monkeys we discussed. A famous relief shows a noblewoman holding her pet monkey on a long, slender leash, allowing it some freedom to climb and play while ensuring it couldn't escape or cause too much trouble. For the most powerful animals, like the leopards in royal processions, heavier, more elaborate collars and leads were used, crafted from sturdy leather and sometimes metal, designed by expert handlers to be both secure and comfortable. This careful daily management of animals reveals a society that saw them as individuals with needs that deserved to be met. The effort put into feeding a specific diet, treating an illness, or crafting a personalized collar speaks to a bond that went beyond mere ownership. It was a relationship built on mutual dependence and respect, where the well-being of the creature was integral to the harmony of the home, whether that home was a simple mud brick house or the sprawling palace of a pharaoh. Beyond the mummies and the bones, perhaps the most vibrant and immediate evidence of this profound bond comes to us through the art they left behind. The walls of tombs and temples, far from being somber monuments to death, were intended as vibrant windows into eternal life. And in these scenes of the perfect afterlife, pets are everywhere, immortalized in stunning detail, showing us exactly how they were woven into the very fabric of daily existence. These aren't just symbolic decorations, they are intimate family portraits, capturing moments of tenderness, playfulness, and companionship that feel instantly familiar to any pet owner today. Look closely at a tomb painting from the New Kingdom, and you'll find a world teeming with life. Beneath the chair of a noblewoman, her sleek cat curls contentedly, often shown nibbling daintily on a fishbone. A small, leashed monkey might be clambering up the leg of her husband's chair, reaching for a piece of fruit. In the gardens, children are depicted chasing ducks or playing with a patient family dog. These scenes are so common, so casually included, that they speak volumes. The artists didn't need to be told to include the pets. Their presence was as natural and expected as the spouse seated next to their partner or the servants bringing offerings. This was the life the deceased wanted to continue forever, and that life was simply not complete without their animal companions. Hieroglyphs themselves, the very language of the gods, are filled with the creatures they lived alongside. The animal signs used in their writing system are not generic, they are often remarkably specific and observant. The sign for the word cat is a small, sitting feline, sometimes with a slightly quizzical tilt to its head. The sign for dog can vary, showing the distinctive pointed ears and curled tail of a tessum. Even the humble hedgehog has its own hieroglyph, a tiny, spiky creature that perfectly captures its essence. This tells us that from the scribe to the farmer, people were keen observers of animal behavior, and these observations were important enough to be codified into their sacred script. One of the most touching and recurring motifs is the act of offering food. In numerous tomb scenes, the deceased is shown holding out a choice piece of meat or a bunch of grapes to a pet dog or cat. This isn't a random artistic choice, it's a powerful statement about the relationship. In Egyptian belief, the offerings presented to the gods and the deceased were what sustained them for eternity. By including a scene where they are actively feeding their pet, the tomb owner is ensuring that beloved animal will also be nourished and cared for in the afterlife. It is a permanent, painted promise of love and responsibility, a guarantee that the bond of care would never be broken. These images also serve as a fascinating social record, revealing the different roles pets played across class lines. In the tomb of a vizier or pharaoh, you might see a majestic cheetah on a leash or a baboon perched solemnly by the throne, symbols of immense power and global reach. But in the more modest tomb of a scribe or craftsman, the pets are far more relatable. A dog is shown faithfully following its master as he inspects his fields. A cat is pictured peeking out from under a chair, its eyes wide and alert. These scenes ground us in the reality that the emotional connection to animals wasn't just for the elite, it was a universal experience, a shared thread of joy and companionship that connected every level of this ancient society, from the royal palace to the simplest home along the Nile. And so this deep connection, this web of affection and reverence that bound the ancient Egyptians to their animals, inevitably found its way into the very laws that governed their society. The relationship between a person and their pet wasn't just a private matter, it was a concern of the state, intertwined with religious belief and social standing in ways that would seem extraordinary today. The Egyptians understood that to harm a sacred animal was to disrupt the cosmic order of Maat itself, and their legal system reflected this profound conviction with startling severity. We have a remarkable account from the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, who traveled through Egypt in the 1st century before the Common Era, describing a law that protected cats with an almost terrifying finality. He wrote that if a Roman citizen, even by complete accident, caused the death of a cat in Egypt, the local populace would immediately gather into an enraged mob. There would be no trial, no appeal to a magistrate, the offender would be seized and executed on the spot, and no authority, not even the Roman governor, would dare to intervene for fear of suffering the same fate. While this story might be slightly exaggerated for a Greek audience, its underlying message is clear. The harm of a sacred animal was a capital offense, a crime against the divine that merited the ultimate punishment. This wasn't just about the loss of property, it was about avenging an insult to the goddess Bastet and safeguarding the spiritual well-being of the entire community. This legal protection extended beyond cats to other revered creatures. To steal or harm a sacred ibis from the Temple of Thoth, or a falcon consecrated to Horus, would have brought similar draconian penalties. The state invested heavily in the upkeep of temple animals, and their theft was a direct crime against the treasury of the gods. Court records on papyrus from the workmen's village of Deir el-Medina provide a more mundane, but no less fascinating, glimpse into how these principles played out in everyday disputes. These documents show that the common people took their ownership of animals very seriously indeed. There are surviving legal petitions where one neighbor sues another over the theft of a prized dog, or a dispute between two families over the ownership of a goat that had wandered onto another's property. The courts would hear these cases and hand down judgments, demonstrating that animals were considered valuable assets whose ownership was legally protected and whose loss required proper compensation. Your choice of pet, or your ability to keep one at all, was also one of the most visible indicators of your social status. For the common farmer or artisan, pet ownership was a simple affair. A dog for protection and hunting, a cat for pest control and divine protection, perhaps a few ducks in the courtyard pond. These were the beloved companions of the average Egyptian. They were functional members of the household, their value measured in practical benefits as much as in affection, but for the pharaoh and the highest nobility, pet ownership was an entirely different endeavor. It was a spectacular display of power, wealth, and global influence. A pharaoh's private menagerie was a living map of his empire and his trade connections. To possess a Nubian cheetah, a Syrian bear, or a giraffe from the legendary land of Punt was to show that your reach extended to the very edges of the known world. These animals were walking, breathing trophies, and the astronomical cost of their capture, transport, and care requiring teams of specialized handlers, veterinarians, and a constant supply of exotic food was a price only the state could afford to pay. This divide is perfectly illustrated by the difference between the simple, woven basket that might house a commoner's cat and the lavish, temple-like enclosures built for a pharaoh's lions. It's the difference between feeding your dog table scraps and provisioning a hippopotamus with 80 pounds of fresh lotus plants daily. The exotic pet was the ancient world's ultimate luxury item, a statement so profound it needed no words. Simply by leading a leopard on a leash in a public procession, a nobleman was communicating his immense wealth, his connection to the priesthood through the sacred leopard skin garment, and his fearless command over the most dangerous forces of nature. The law, society, and religion all converged to shape these relationships, creating a world where the bond with an animal could define your place in the hierarchy, invoke the wrath of the gods, or become a matter for the royal courts themselves. Yet this tangible world of pets and menageries was intertwined with a deeper, more mystical layer of Egyptian thought, a realm where animals were not just living creatures, but powerful symbols of cosmic forces. Alongside the physical baboons and falcons were beings of pure myth, creatures that never drew breath but profoundly influenced how the Egyptians viewed the real animals they lived beside. These mythical beasts acted as a kind of divine blueprint, shaping the purpose and meaning of pet ownership and turning every home into a potential shrine to a greater power. Chief among these mythical creatures was the magnificent Bennu bird, a legendary heron-like being that the Greeks would later call the phoenix. The Bennu was not a pet in any conventional sense. It was a solitary, awe-inspiring symbol of creation and cyclical rebirth. Ancient texts describe it as a self-created being. the first life to emerge from the primordial mound of earth that rose from the watery chaos at the dawn of time. It was closely associated with the sun god Ra and the cycle of the sun itself. The myth tells that the Bennu bird would, at the end of a long era, build a fragrant nest of myrrh and cinnamon twigs. It would then set the nest ablaze, consumed by the flames, only to rise again anew from the ashes, young and vibrant once more. This powerful story of death and resurrection made the Bennu one of the most potent symbols of eternal life and the never-ending renewal of the world. This mythical concept had a direct impact on the treatment of real birds in Egypt. The reverence for the Bennu elevated all herons and egrets to a higher status. While not kept as household pets, these birds were protected and venerated in their natural habitats along the Nile. To see a great heron standing silently at the riverbank at dawn was to witness a living echo of the primordial Bennu, a reminder of creation itself. This symbolic connection encouraged a general attitude of respect for avian life and reinforced the idea that birds could be messengers or manifestations of the divine. The practice of keeping falcons and ibises, then, wasn't just about appreciating their beauty or hunting skill. It was an attempt to capture a sliver of that Bennu-like magic, to have a creature in your care that resonated with the ultimate promise of rebirth. On the opposite end of the spiritual spectrum was the great serpent Apep, the embodiment of pure chaos, darkness, and evil. This was the ultimate mythical antagonist, a cosmic monster of unimaginable size that dwelled in the eternal darkness of the underworld. Every night, as the sun god Ra traveled through the perilous realm of the dead in his solar bark, Apep would lie in wait, trying to devour him and plunge the world into everlasting night. The Egyptians believed that the terrifying solar eclipses they witnessed were moments when Apep nearly succeeded in swallowing the sun whole. The nightly struggle was a foundational myth, representing the constant, fragile battle between order, known as Ma'at, and the forces of chaos that sought to unravel creation. This myth of a constant battle against a serpentine force of evil deeply influenced the Egyptian relationship with real snakes. The deadly Egyptian cobra, the uraeus, was fearsome precisely because it was a living, breathing piece of that cosmic chaos. But instead of simply fearing it, they performed a brilliant act of symbolic alchemy. By placing the image of the reared cobra on the pharaoh's crown, they transformed the ultimate symbol of terror into the ultimate symbol of protection. They were in effect taming chaos itself. This mythological backdrop made the real, physical act of a priest handling a sacred cobra in the temple an incredibly powerful ritual. He wasn't just managing a dangerous animal, he was reenacting the daily victory of Ra over Apep, demonstrating the pharaoh's divine power to control the chaotic forces that threatened the world. Even the commoner who tolerated a grass snake in their granary was participating in this myth, engaging in a small, practical pact with a creature of the underworld for mutual benefit. Other mythical creatures further blurred the line between the real and the symbolic. The griffin, a majestic hybrid with the body of a lion and the head of a falcon, represented a fusion of the king of the beasts and the king of the sky, a perfect symbol of pharaonic dominance over all realms. The fierce Ammit, the devourer of the dead, who waited by the scales of judgment in the underworld, was a terrifying composite of a crocodile, a lion, and a hippopotamus, the three most feared predators in Egypt. This monstrous conception shows how they took the most dangerous physical attributes from the animal world and combined them into a single spiritual entity that represented the ultimate consequence of a sinful life. This rich world of myth ultimately provided a divine justification for the entire practice of keeping exotic pets. A nobleman who acquired a powerful lion cub wasn't just showing off his wealth, he was attempting to bring the strength of the sun god's protector into his home. A priest caring for a sacred crocodile was tending to a creature that shared its form with Sobek, a god of immense power, the mythical realm gave every animal a role in a vast cosmic story. This transformed pet ownership from a simple hobby into a sacred act of participation in the universe's divine order. By caring for these living symbols, the ancient Egyptians believed they were nurturing the very principles of creation, protection, and rebirth, ensuring that the forces of light would always triumph over the darkness, both in their homes and in the cosmos beyond. However, for a long time, many historians wondered if these stories of deep affection were romanticized myths. Could a civilization capable of such grand monuments and complex gods truly have cherished individual animals with the same tenderness we do today? The answer came not from a grand temple inscription, but from the sand itself, in the form of silent, profound discoveries that have forever changed our understanding. Archaeology has provided the undeniable, tangible proof that these bonds were real, and it's found in the quiet, carefully prepared graves of the animals themselves. One of the most extraordinary sights is a sprawling pet cemetery uncovered in the Red Sea port town of Baboons, dating back to the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, a time when Rome ruled Egypt. This isn't a place of simple disposal. Here, archaeologists have unearthed over 100 individual animal burials, and the care taken is breathtaking. The vast majority are cats, but there are also dogs and even monkeys, each laid to rest with quiet dignity. These weren't tossed into a pit, they were carefully wrapped in shrouds, sometimes made from recycled linen or even expensive imported fabrics. Many were placed in makeshift coffins crafted from broken pottery jars or carefully constructed wooden boxes. Perhaps most touching of all, some of the cats were found with small, intricately crafted iron collars still around their necks. These animals weren't just pets, they were family members, given a formal burial that closely mirrored the human practices of the time. The location itself is telling. This wasn't a dump on the edge of town. This cemetery was situated right next to the official human burial ground, a powerful statement that these creatures were considered worthy of resting near their people for all eternity. The citizens of Baboons went to significant expense and effort, using precious materials, to ensure their companions had a peaceful journey to the afterlife, proving that this emotional connection transcended economic class and historical period. Further supporting this idea are discoveries from much earlier in Egyptian history. In the sacred necropolis of Abydos, a site dedicated to the god Osiris, excavators found a series of simple yet profound graves. These weren't for pharaohs, but for the common working dogs of a middle-class community. In one particularly moving burial, a dog was laid to rest in a curled, sleeping position, and around its neck was its well-worn leather collar. The collar wasn't plain, it was decorated with a simple, carved bone plaque. While the name has faded, the presence of the collar itself is a deeply personal detail. This wasn't a random stray, this was a specific dog, known and named, who wore its collar every day. Its owners chose to bury it with this most personal of possessions, the one object that defined it as a beloved member of the household. They wanted to ensure it would be recognized and cared for in the next world. These humble graves at Abydos are perhaps even more powerful evidence than the grander ones at Baboons, because they show that this profound bond wasn't just a practice of the elite or a later Roman influence. It was a feeling deeply embedded in the hearts of ordinary Egyptians for thousands of years. Of course, the most famous evidence of all comes from the millions of animal mummies entombed throughout Egypt. The catacombs at Saqqara are a labyrinthine testament to this practice, with tunnels stretching for miles underground, filled with pots and boxes containing mummified ibises, falcons, baboons, and cats. Initially, many of these were thought to be purely votive standardized offerings mass-produced for pilgrims to purchase and offer to the gods, but modern technology has revealed a far more nuanced and personal story. When researchers began using non-invasive CT scanners to look inside these mummies, they made astonishing discoveries. While many do contain complete animals, prepared with meticulous care, others tell a different tale. Some contain only partial remains, perhaps a few bones or feathers, while others hold entirely different animals, or sometimes no animal at all, just being bundles of sticks or reeds. This indicates an industry that sometimes struggled to meet the overwhelming demand from devout pilgrims, yet the symbolic act of offering remained powerful. But nestled among these millions are the true standouts, the personal pet mummies. These are immediately obvious from their quality. They are the ones carefully positioned in a lifelike pose, with their linen bandages arranged in elaborate, decorative patterns. They are the ones found not in a mass catacomb, but within a human family's tomb, placed right beside the sarcophagus of their owner. A scan of one of these pet mummies reveals an animal that lived a long, healthy life, with no signs of trauma or the deliberate breakage of the neck that was sometimes used in ritual offerings. These animals died of natural causes and were then given the highest honor their family could bestow, eternal preservation and a guaranteed place alongside them in the afterlife. The difference between a mass-produced votive mummy and a beloved pet mummy is the difference between a printed prayer card and a handwritten love letter. One is a general act of faith, the other is a specific, enduring promise of love and reunion. Through these graves, these collars, and these meticulously wrapped forms, the ancient Egyptians speak to us directly across the millennia, their affection for their animal companions forever preserved in the dry, silent earth. This profound reverence for animals, so deeply embedded in the fabric of ancient Egyptian life, did not vanish with the fall of the pharaohs. Instead, it flowed outwards like the Nile itself, irrigating the cultures that followed and leaving a permanent mark on how humanity views its animal companions. The Greek and Roman historians who visited Egypt, like Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus, were absolutely fascinated by what they witnessed. They returned home with incredible stories of sacred cats, of crocodiles adorned with gold, and of laws that punished the harm of an animal with death. These accounts spread throughout the Mediterranean world, not just as tales of a strange and exotic land, but as a powerful new concept that an animal could be more than just a tool or a piece of property. It could be a sacred being deserving of legal protection and profound respect. This idea was revolutionary, and while the Romans never adopted the full religious fervor of Egyptian animal worship, it undoubtedly softened attitudes and influenced the development of their own practices, from keeping small dogs as lap warmers to the use of birds in augury. Perhaps the most direct and lasting legacy can be seen in the very dogs and cats that share our homes today. The sleek, pointy-eared Tessem hound, so beloved by the Egyptians, is believed to be a foundational ancestor for many of the sighthound breeds we know and love. When you look at a modern pharaoh hound, with its graceful build and distinctive noble bearing, you are quite literally looking at a living relic of ancient times, a breed whose lineage was carefully preserved and spread through trade and conquest. Similarly, the domestic cat's journey to global ubiquity began in earnest along the Nile. Egyptian ports were major hubs of commerce, and cats were highly valued passengers on trading ships for their unparalleled skill at protecting grain cargoes from rats and mice. They sailed across the Mediterranean, establishing new populations in Greece, Rome, and eventually across all of Europe. The special status they enjoyed in Egypt traveled with them, seeding the idea of the cat as a cherished companion rather than a mere utility animal, a perception that would sadly wax and wane through history, but whose origin point can be traced back to the banks of the Nile. The echoes of ancient practices resonate in our modern rituals of pet ownership in surprisingly specific ways. The elaborate collars we buy for our pets, often inscribed with their name and our phone number, are a direct continuation of a 4,000-year-old tradition. The Egyptians were the first to craft personalized collars for their dogs, adorning them with their pet's name. We still mummify our animals, though we now call it pet taxidermy or preservation for those who cannot bear to part with their companion's physical form. And the entire industry of pet cemeteries, where we lay our beloved animals to rest with headstones and toys, finds its ancient predecessor in the carefully prepared graves of Baroness and Abydos. The emotional impulse is identical, a deep-seated need to honor a bond that transcends species and to ensure a dignified farewell for a cherished member of the family. Most importantly, the ancient Egyptians gifted us a philosophical framework for the human-animal bond that we are still unpacking today. They articulated a world where this relationship was not one-sided ownership, but a reciprocal partnership built on mutual benefit and spiritual symbiosis. Your cat wasn't just a pet, it was a protector against evil spirits. Your dog wasn't just a hunter, it was an echo of the guardian god Anubis. This perspective elevates the connection to something sacred. In our modern era, as we increasingly recognize the therapeutic benefits of pets, how they reduce stress, alleviate loneliness, and provide unconditional love, we are, in a way, rediscovering this ancient wisdom. We may not frame it in terms of battling invisible demons, but we understand scientifically what they understood intuitively, that living with animals is fundamentally good for the human soul. The ancient Egyptians would look at our assistance dogs, our therapy cats, and our emotional support animals and nod in recognition. They knew it all along. From the loyal dogs resting at their master's feet to the pet lions that prowled the palace gardens, the ancient Egyptians shared their world with an astounding menagerie. We've met cats revered as living goddesses, baboons trained as symbols of wisdom, and even crocodiles adorned with gold and worshipped as river gods. We've explored serene garden ponds stocked with sacred tilapia and heard the chattering of imported monkeys in the halls of the elite. This wasn't just about vanity or exotic tastes, it was a profound reflection of how they saw the universe. Every animal, from the mightiest hippopotamus to the humblest scarab beetle, held a piece of the divine puzzle, a symbol of protection, a promise of rebirth, or a direct link to the gods themselves. Their love for these creatures was so powerful that it transcended death, with mummified pets buried alongside their families to ensure their companionship would last for all eternity. This incredible journey reveals a civilization that saw the wild not just as something to be feared or conquered, but as something to be understood, respected, and invited into their homes. Their relationships with animals were a beautiful, complex blend of practical utility, deep affection, and powerful spirituality. It challenges our modern notion of a pet and makes us wonder about the bonds we form with our own animal companions today. So now we turn to you. After exploring this world of divine cats and walking with pet baboons, which of these ancient Egyptian companions would you have chosen? Would you feel safer with a protective feline guardian by your side, or would you prefer the impressive power of a leopard on a leash for your morning stroll? Perhaps the graceful silence of an ornamental pond filled with fish is more your style, or the constant, entertaining chaos of a mischievous pet monkey. Let us know your choice down in the comments. We are genuinely curious to hear which of these bizarre pets captures your imagination. If you enjoyed this dive into the mysteries of ancient Egypt, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next adventure into the past. We're always uncovering new stories and secrets from history's most fascinating chapters. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, the next time your own pet curls up beside you, know that you're participating in a tradition of love and companionship that is truly thousands of years in the making.